Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our Cybersecurity Awareness Month webinar series on the topic of the business risk identity theft, just like people. So we're going to talk about how that happens. My name is Catherine Honeycutt. I'm the communication specialist for Better Business Bureau serving Eastern North Carolina. Before we dive into today's great webinar, I do want to share a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, so be sure to check it out on our YouTube page afterwards. And if you happen to miss part 1 of this series, you can also find that there. It's already on our page. So just search Better Business Bureau of Eastern North Carolina. Secondly, if you are listening live and you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box at any time, and we'll be keeping an eye on that so we can answer those for you. And without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mike Parsons of BlueTeamAssess. And Mike, I will pass it over to you to get us started.
Hey, thank you, Catherine. Well, it's just a pleasure to be with everybody today. This is, as Catherine mentioned, this is part 2 of a 2-part series, and I want to give a special shout out to the Eastern North Carolina Better Business Bureau. Supporting communication activities like this is just so important for small businesses as well as other organizations that may happen to tune in. And I guess the question today, as a business, can you afford to have somebody steal your identity? And of course, the first question that came to my mind a couple of years ago is, wow, can my business identity be stolen? And the fact of the matter is, yes, it can, just like an individual's identity can be stolen. We're going to talk about that this morning. So, as Catherine mentioned, I own a veteran cybersecurity consulting company out here on the East Coast. And my passion is working with small businesses and working with people, making them able to confront the threats that they're facing. So the whole purpose of these types of presentations now, not that I don't do this on an ongoing basis throughout the year, is this is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is sponsored by the National Cybersecurity Alliance and began back in 2004. When the National Cybersecurity Alliance and the Department of Homeland Security came together to create this month to basically emphasize the need for cybersecurity. The theme of the National Cybersecurity Alliance month this year is do your part, be cyber smart. And their ongoing mantra is stop, think, connect. So if you get a suspicious email, then stop. Do you know that person? If you do, then think about it. Is this within their normal pattern of behavior? For example, I noticed that my good friend Phil's on the line. If Phil sent me a link saying, hey, Mike, you got to check this out, well, that would be totally out of character for Phil to do that to me. So I'd probably get on the phone and call him up or send him an email saying, Phil, did you just send this to me? So think about what's going on in your emails. Too many people get caught up in the moment. They're going too fast. They don't look at the address on the email very carefully. So stop and think about what you just have in your mailbox. And then only after you're satisfied, then and only then connect. It will save you a lot of grief going forward if you think, just remember that mantra. So to kind of set the tone, I've got a little video for you to see.
Mike, I don't think we can hear the volume on it.
Oh, no.
I think you just have to share your, change your audio settings. So if you go to audio settings and then under share screen, you just want to make sure that your volume is shared with your video.
Where would I do that? Is that better?
Yep.
This is CSEN News with Chet Barkley.
Shark Attack 2020. I guess sharks have to start looking out for scammers as well as killer whales. Real estate mogul and Shark Tank star Barbara Corcoran was duped out of almost $400,000 by an elaborate social engineering scheme. When they hooked that big fish, they must have been thinking, we're going to need a bigger bank. How many shark references are in this?
There's 4 more.
I'm not reading it. The reason we did this story is to show you that anyone can get hacked through phishing.
Even a shark.
Oh, God.
This is your CSEN tip of the week.
Common phishing emails may pose as someone from a well-known company, even using real logos trying to trick you into clicking on it. Never click on links from an unknown sender before carefully vetting the address of a web page or URL. They also might use a web address that is similar to a well-known site to deceive you, so stay vigilant and don't get fooled into opening yourself up to trouble. That's your CSEN tip of the day.
Okay, until next time, I'm Chet Barkley.
Be hee hee ho ho, greatest training ever.
So that video is protected by copyright held by Greatest Training Ever. And it's part of their program to provide high-end content to SMBs who want to enhance or begin a security awareness program. So I just, when I was looking over their videos, it just resonated with me that this was so much in support of what I'm talking about today. The phishing attack, the business executive compromise, all of those things we'll talk about more as we go forward. So just briefly, why do we have cybersecurity needs for small business? Well, as a business, we can't do business if we don't earn our customers' trust. I know that if I look out to you that are watching this presentation today, and I asked you straight up, would you do business with somebody you can't trust? And I would expect that a good majority of the time, no. It's under extreme circumstances that I would ever consider doing business with somebody that I don't trust. And that those extreme circumstances was maybe they're the only game in town. I don't have a whole lot of choice, but I'd have to be very wary about what I did. But here's the things that make a good business. They protect customer and business partners' data. And in turn, customers and partners will trust those businesses because they know you look out for their stuff. They don't want to see a headline the next day that ABC Realty was hacked and all their customer files are now for sale on the dark web. Good businesses understand that good cybersecurity is a business differentiator. It's not just another expense that attacks our profits. It's something that helps build our profits, because if people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, they're going to be more likely to come trade with us. Following good cybersecurity practices helps protect customer and partner data. It just follows that way. So as a business, then we need to know what threats to protect against. We need to know how to properly secure the information. We need to teach our employees what we expect of them as team members. And we need to understand the compliance requirements so that we protect their business and its stakeholders. It's not too cool for a business who violates the payment card industry standards and then loses their ability to accept payment cards. Think about today's climate. How many stores have you been into where they're pleading with you to use plastic because they don't have the change available to make change? We're in a different time. So we're talking about business identity theft. I want to take you back a couple of years. I'm sure there are some people listening to this video right now saying, Rockford Files, catch me if you can. You know, what's that? Well, the Rockford Files, guy, he's still alive, as I recall, James Garner, was playing the role of a private investigator called Jim Rockford. He had a little machine in his car that he used to print up a business card. When he was on a case and trying to get protected information, think of it that way. This was information protected by whoever he was talking to. So he would print up a little business card, and he didn't want to say, "This is Jim Rockford, private investigator." Rather, he'll say, "This is Jim Smith, and I'm a customer service rep from ABC Company, and I'd like to talk to you about, your experience with this or that." So he was able to get in the door and get the information he needed. The next one that I mentioned is Catch Me If You Can. And there was a guy back in the 1970s by the name of Frank Abagnale Jr. Well, Frank posed as a Pan Am pilot, a doctor, a teacher, and an attorney, among other roles. And what he discovered was he could create a personality for each of those roles through the use of, putting together ID cards and actually printing them on a copier and then laminating them, or doctor, or teacher, an attorney, basically enough information to get people to trust him. And then during that time, and the FBI was chasing him all over the world, by the way, at the time, he reportedly cashed $2.5 million of bad checks posing those different roles. I remember watching the movie, and it was hilarious. I actually had seen Frank Abagnale give a presentation at one of the geek conferences I used to go to. And he was quite an interesting gentleman and very creative with the use of a copier back in those days. We didn't have the internet and the fine printers that we have today. So he basically did this using an X-Acto knife and whatever to piece things together, and then used his knowledge of copiers to be able to make a perfect image. And in some respects, I'd say that business identity theft today is actually a lot easier. You don't have to be going out and exposing yourself to exposing your body to potential abuse. So what is business identity theft? Well, let's take a look at what it's not, because I don't want to get us down a rabbit hole that talks about data breaches. Pure and simple, business identity theft is the action when another person tries to impersonate the business and represent that business to do something bad. And some of that representation occurs within the business, some of it's with business partners. So first and foremost, business identity theft is not an information security breach. And then I came across a quote from Fundera, which is a business consulting firm that helps businesses get financing, who said it's also not employee theft, although an employee may be involved. And I worked with a restaurant in another town where the guy who owned the restaurant had gotten it from his father. He really it was really sudden. He wasn't prepared for it when it happened, and so he was kind of caught in the mix. He knew he had to upfit the restaurant and make it more attractive to clientele. He had a problem. Wasn't the food. He had his dad's recipes, but the problem is that he ended up having people in charge that he couldn't trust at the end. He had a day manager who just was not happy with the way things were going and had her own way of what she was going to do in the dining room. And then there was the head chef. And then there was the guy that said, "Oh yeah, I can get you the funding you need. Let's go through the restaurant." And so after several trips, it seemed like the angel funder hooked up with the day manager, who in turn brought the cook along, and they ended up taking this guy's dad's recipes, the menu, and walked out, leaving the guy in a lurch. He still had a bad, the restaurant was in need of remodeling that made it less attractive to customers, and he was confronted with a restaurant newly opened on the other side of town, advertising the fact that they had his dad's recipes, as if it was just normal everyday business as business. And unfortunately, in situations like this, there's really no recourse against that type of activity, which gives us some of the problems that we have with business identity theft to begin with. So just like its consumer counterpart, business identity theft involves the actual impersonation of the business itself, and that impersonation can take many forms. The restaurant story is one, but there are some others as well. Every once in a while, you'll hear people talk about corporate identity theft. It's not the larger corporations that these guys are always after. They cast a much wider net. So they go after all businesses, as well as state and local government, schools, and nonprofits. When I say nonprofits, I also include churches in that. And it's not unusual for losses in the mid-six figures by the time the compromise is detected. And that came from a guy named Robert Strezzi, risk analyst for Dun & Bradstreet. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So first and foremost, why is this important? Well, we as businesses just don't have the same protection as consumers. I don't know why. From a small business standpoint, to me, the ones that are the sole proprietors or a very tight-knit family group should have the same protection as customers or as consumers. For example, consumers have access to their credit reports. Businesses don't. In fact, the main reporting agency for business credit worthiness is Dun & Bradstreet, and they charge businesses for providing anything out of their files more than minimal information. Only one credit reporting agency actually offers a small business or a business at all of freezing their business credit files, whereas it's a walk in the park for a consumer to get that kind of protection. EIN and DUNS numbers, even though they're critical pieces of data, are not protected like consumer PII is, or the health equivalent, the personal health information. And consumer accounts, if you have a bank account, personal bank account, there's a cap on your liability if you report the event correctly of $50. And in many cases today, even that $50 is forgiven. While businesses have no cap at making, which means if we get attacked using account takeover, it could be game over for us as a business, given the speed at which our accounts can be drained. Federal and state legislation to date is identity theft consumer oriented. And I'm not a lawyer, so don't take book on this. Go consult your own legal counsel. But to me, it makes me think that for businesses, this probably means that it's going to be a civil action that needs to be taken against a malicious actor. And I'm not going to have the benefit of state prosecution because there's no law that covers it. So let's talk about business identity theft in North Carolina. I came across a document from the North Carolina Department of Justice, our Attorney General, Josh Stein. And it says, protect your business from ID theft. And you think, oh, wow, so North Carolina protects businesses against business identity theft. Well, no. What it's doing is it's giving businesses instruction on collecting consumer data or customer data. So all the takeaways are correct. Only collect necessary individual data. Finally, the medical services offices are no longer insisting on getting your social security number. Protect computers to avoid theft of individual data. Keep protected individual data out of correspondence. Properly dispose of documents and media containing protected individual data. Take steps to protect customer personal information in accordance with Identity Theft Protection Act. See the common theme here? It's telling businesses, us, how we, what we need to do to protect our customer data. Well, we understand that, but who's helping us? Even though in the law does protect identifying information and includes employer tax identification numbers, all bank account numbers, and all debit and credit cards, but still the focus is clearly the consumer. There's no mention of the Dun & Bradstreet number or some of the other identifying numbers that we have. Businesses face major financial and operational risk from a business identity theft. There's a columnist by the name of Brian Krebs, and actually he's no longer a columnist as much as he is a blogger. And over the years, he's become quite the go-to expert for a lot of cybersecurity stuff. He used to work as a reporter for the Washington Post and went out on his own a couple of years ago. In 2019, he reported that Dun & Bradstreet had saw more than 100% increase in business identity theft over 2018. And as of July 2020, Dun & Bradstreet's estimating a 258% increase in business identity theft over the same period last year. Those are huge numbers. And part of it is due to the way that COVID has caused us to start dealing with things. Virtual is great in terms of accessibility, but virtual is bad because it makes it far too easy to be on the other end of that line. And as one dog said to another, on the internet, nobody knows if you're a dog. Another site, payments.com, back in 2018, came up with the fact that IRS had reported more than 10,000 instances of business identity theft in 2017. In fact, IRS has publications on how tax preparers need to treat business identity theft. Another organization, the National Cybersecurity Society, estimated in 2017 that a year-to-year decline in value to $137 million, but there was still a 46% increase in cases. So maybe the value is going down, and that probably reflects the smaller fish that they're going after. But in terms of number of cases, there's been a 46% increase. So it is a growing threat. So we're going to look at some of the different types of business identity theft and talk about remediation. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way. There are many other ways that you can get in, but and there are some things that are not strictly cyber, such as putting up false storefronts. So let's start off, and we're going to begin with business executive compromise. So in this particular case, this comes to, this is actually the same thing that you heard in that little blurb in the security awareness video. So business email compromise, business executive compromise, this is probably one of the most common business identity theft events. It usually involves a company director, executive, or CEO to make money or steal information. So for example, maybe somebody impersonates the chief financial officer, say his name's John Jones, and John Jones allegedly sends an email to his accounts payable person asking if they could send a wire transfer to a new client that they just logged. And the accounts payable person, because it's the chief financial officer, of course, immediately gets to work, sends out the wire transfer. The problem is that the customer was fictitious and the bank account was real. And so the company was out over $100,000 in one fell swoop. That actually almost occurred at a company I work with, where the CFO did send, somebody impersonating the CFO did send a wire transfer request to accounts payable. And it was just by happenstance that the CFO was in the office that day, and the accounts payable person turned around and said, "Hey, Jerry, did you send that email to me?" He said, "What email?" And we found out that somebody had gotten into the CFO's email, compromised their account. So, there was nothing that I could have as a monitor that would have stopped that email. This was all on the stop, think, connect thing, that the accounts payable person, rather than blindly following the instructions in the email, turned around and asked and verified the request. And it's a goal to lure employees, partners, or customers to take specific action, such as giving up secrets or making wire transfers. And those are actually the two main thrusts of this type of event. Cybersecurity awareness training and interactive phishing simulations are definitely preventive measures that can be taken. You saw the one clip. There are lots of other cybersecurity awareness training providers that have similar types of vignettes, little sound bites, if you will. Implement multi-factor authentication and create run books using out-of-band verification. So what's multi-factor authentication? We all experience it these days. When we go to change our password on some service, they want you to validate that you are who you say you are, and they send a little text message to your phone. Or maybe you're using one of the new identity apps like Ping or something along that line, Microsoft Authenticator, where you have to match up with the challenge that's being asked you with the number that particular application provides. And then we also need to think about using software that has next generation endpoint security and secure email gateway solutions. So it's just an idea, add layer after layer of protection. So how about account takeover attacks? These are pretty prevalent as well. And obviously these attacks or threats can be stacked one on top of the other to make a much more complex story. But in general, account takeover means you just have to have a valid set of credentials, which may be a login and a stolen password, or a login and a guest password, or brute force. The thing that makes it detection is that ATO, or account takeover, uses such a small amount of data that it's very difficult to figure out what the root cause of that account takeover was. And obtaining credentials for what I call the right accounts or high value accounts has a lot more value to the bad guys than a stolen credit card. Why? Because they could actually sit down and be harvesting money from customers of your business without you ever knowing about it, unless one of your customers said, "Hey, this is strange. I just paid that invoice. Why are you asking me for payment on the same invoice again?" So it's only when something like that gets back to you that you actually start to take notice. And the bad guys may also use malware that comes in through another phishing attack, where they leave you a present, what I call keylogging Trojans. So what in the world is keylogging Trojan? Well, you know that when you're using your PC to go to your bank, you put in your user ID and password. And if you don't have multi-factor authentication, that's all it takes to get in. Well, I know of a situation where I worked before. We had a church as one of our customers, and it seems that the secretary of the church somehow had her user ID and password compromised. I imagine that it was one of these keyloggers, which basically recorded her user ID and password as she tried to connect to her bank account, her church's bank account, and they then turned around later on in the evening, used that same set of credentials that had been recorded and sent to them to go ahead and get into the church's financial account, take all the money out of the account through an electronic wire transfer, and then go about their business. When the secretary realized that the money was gone, that the balance was zero, she went to the bank. But by law, the bank didn't have to make good or restore the church to to what it had. It was out of the goodwill of the bank that they actually did have restitution in place. And of course, you got to ask yourself, would you like to be the CFO of the bank or the CEO of the bank going to the church service the next Sunday morning and trying to explain why the bank wasn't making good the $50,000 in the building fund? So the case that I talked about on the CFO was actually an account takeover. The person had gotten into their Exchange Online email account by brute forcing their password, and were able to get all the contact information and just started shooting out emails. One of those emails happened to land at the accounts payable person in the company. But other than that, because it was an account takeover, there was no way that you could trace back on when it happened and why it happened. What we did was to just put multi-factor authentication in for the email, and we haven't had a repeat of that problem since then. And then finally, another target is just placing fraudulent orders or other high-value transactions like wire transfers. And I mentioned one of the defenses is to kind of have a run book change. So it says whenever you have a request for a wire transfer, you have to have somebody call the requester and verify that that request was legitimate and that the accounts were legitimate. And you do that over the phone and not through an exchange of email. So some of the other things, deployment of a strong IPS, that's an intrusion protection prevention system. Basically what you're trying to do is get continuous monitoring of your network traffic, both the traffic that's coming in and out of your organization, as well as traffic between the different employees. Why do we do that? It's not that we're spying on our employees, it's because we know that the bad guys can put malware into their machines that can communicate without the employees really knowing that their machine is computing with each other. We also look at user behavior and locational data, such as network details, what proxies were they using, previous logins. Is this login attempt coming from China as opposed from New York City? So a lot of different things that we're doing, trying to get a handle on what the traffic looks like and what the user behavior looks like. And just a note on the strong password management practices, this idea of password length. The truth of the matter is that you really don't need the complexity of a password as much as you need a long password. For example, I might have a password that I want to use called oh beautiful for spacious skies. I had to think on that one a minute, without any spaces, and that's my password. That cracks the 15 character issue. It's something that's easily remembered, and the chances of the bad guys being able to brute force that password in our lifetime is very slim. The idea of complexity came along because too many systems would not allow those long passwords, and so they used complexity as being another way of doing it. So the more complex it is, the harder it is to crack. But then again, the more complex it is, the more difficult it is for you to remember. So that means that everybody writes it down on that little sticky note, puts it on underneath their keyboard, and thinks that they've succeeded in protecting their password. And we can have another discussion on that later.
Mike, before you move on, I just wanted to mention we got a quick question from Robin in the chat about wire transfers and asking what other ways are more secure.
Okay, the wire transfer itself is secure. The action, from the standpoint of when the bank initiates the wire transfer and when the wire transfer is received, that's a secure transaction. What's insecure is how does the bank accept that request? For example, when the person that manages the wire transfer at the bank has as part of her run book or her operational manual that she needs to call and verify that the request is legitimate. So the wire transfer itself as a transaction is secure. It's protected path, all the stuff that security practitioners like to see. But getting the proper authorization for the wire transfer to occur and how the bank or a company goes about doing that is where the security falls down. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Thank you for that. Robin, does that answer your question? Or do you have anything else? I'll see if she puts anything in the chat.
Yeah.
But thank you for answering that.
Yeah. And it's a great question. I mean, for example, I can send out an invoice to my customers that actually provides for either payment using an electronic check, which is where you put your routing number and bank account number in, or uses a credit card. Any of these payment processes in and of themselves is pretty well protected. Where we fall down on the protections is how we authorize them, what's required to authorize them, and how does it get processed within the organization. So wire transfer is probably one of the more efficient ways of getting payments between companies. I certainly will take that before I will a check in the mail. Well, I'm not going to get into that, but I have my own challenges with the post office out here where I live. So let's talk about employee tax identification number and Dun & Bradstreet identification number. So certainly the employee tax identification number is needed for a business to open up a bank account. And so that's the equivalent of the business social security number. The Dun & Bradstreet identification number, if you're involved in federal contracting, you need to have a DUNS number. It's free to obtain, but neither of these are really protected in the same way that personal identifying information is protected. But yet they're needed so in so many cases. So that's an issue of why you need to do special protections on your own to protect them. How do you what are some of the ways you can do that? Is you can do what's called tokenization of the EIN and DUNS numbers. So basically you get a piece of software that you run your transaction through that will scramble the employee identification number and the DUNS numbers because you know what field they are. And it gets a little complex and hairy to set up. But what it means is that you can still access that person by that EIN or DUNS number because you have a lookup table that does the match. But to somebody who steals that file, it's meaningless to them because all they see is a scrambled set of numbers that is only meaningful if you have the translation table within your grasp. And then also regularly review your tax records and credit requests by the business searching for non-recognized transactions, which is good practice for you to do as a consumer as well, but it's more important for a business because we don't have those automatic protections that fall into play. So there's also this thing called domain name theft. When you get, for example, when I get an email from Phil, I noticed he got on the discussion today. I know that it's, at least I anticipate that it's Phil because of his email address. I recognize the domain that he uses for his email. What can happen is that the hacker gains access to this, to the domain registrar that holds or hosts that domain name. We as individuals can't do that. We have to pay somebody to give us a domain name and maintain it for us, and you get an access to an account where you can make changes to those DNS records that affect your email routing and processing. For example, I was involved with a situation at a bank where I worked, and we started having complaints come into our customer service office that the individual trying to get to their online banking was getting sent to a website that was blocked because it had pornography on it. Well, that was kind of unusual because last time we looked, our website didn't have that kind of offering. And so we did a little bit of investigation and found that in the domain name server, which relates the English domain name, or the plain language domain name, to this unintelligible string of numbers called an IP address, somebody had changed the relationship. They were taking our domain name, which was used for our website, and they were instead associated with an IP address of a totally different server, which had pornography on it. When our customers tried to get to their online banking, their web content filter was stopping them from being able to get to what they thought was our website. It took us a couple of expensive consultants and a lightning round over a weekend of trying to get the mess cleared up. And it all was because our provider didn't maintain proper security for the domain name server. So how do you fix that? First, back to multi-factor authentication again, and strong password management. Those are critical building blocks in securing your stuff. Why? Because you don't want your passwords to be easily guessed. And also because you want a second opinion as to whether it's you or not. Think of multi-factor authentication in that way. And we also need to not do a low-cost bid award and actually spend a little bit of money on our domain registrar company who's going to differentiate themselves from security and reliability. There's a lot of effort out on the internet on securing the name servers because it is so critical to internet communication and reliability as well. And then finally, in case somebody gets in and just moves your domain to a totally different registrar, you can enable what's called domain locking to prevent domain transfer without a identified person who has the authority to make that domain transfer. For example, you may, unless Robin approves it, you can't move this domain from this registrar.
Mike, before you move on, we got one more question
Okay.
about someone asked, how can I get a DNS number?
Oh, a DUNS number?
Or a DUNS number,
So-
yes, sorry.
Okay, go to Dun and Bradstreet. And see, I think it's Dun and I think it's you use an ampersand sign or just Google Dun and Bradstreet and go out to their site, and the process of applying for a DUNS number is very straightforward, and it's free. Free to have the number issued to you, and it's free because the federal government relies on it, and they said, okay, if we're going to use your number, you can't charge people for giving out this number. So what's not free is when they try to sell you their premier service for $100 and some a month, so that you get credit reports.
Awesome, thank you for that.
So domain spoofing, which is basically important from the standpoint of what I call email authentication. And this allows attackers to represent themselves in email as an employee of the target domain. So you may, and I'm sure you guys have seen this before, you see an email that says it's from Sally Smith at abc.com. And yet in the parentheses right after that, you have some unintelligible email address that has nothing to do with Sally Smith. So that's one of the things that domain spoofing does. Another thing is more insidious, where the attacker, and this is more the case these days, the attacker actually relies on the fact that the target company they're after does not protect their domain. So what do I mean when I say does not protect their domain? Let me go out to this site, demarkian.com. Hopefully that's going to, and I'll move this over to the sharing screen. I really wish that my software had a question. So, and which screen would you like this displayed here, sir? So I'm going to plug in my domain. And this is, you don't have to be a member of demarkian.com or any of the other checks. So let's spell my name correctly. And so check my domain. And it goes off and thanks. And I get this little message. It says, well done, your domain is protected against abuse by phishers and spammers. And it goes through, and I thought I had that fixed. Anyway, I have some work to do now again. Well, I don't have those selectors, but so you notice here I have, and we're going to talk about this here in a second, I've got this little thing called P equals reject. So that's my policy. If it fails DMARC because of this value or this value, then the whole email should get rejected and just disappear into the black hole of neverness. Let's see. So again, it didn't cost me anything to do that, but this is basically what the hackers are doing. They'll say, okay, well, let me see some, here's a list of 50 targets I'm going to go after today. Let's go through the list and see who's got protection and who doesn't. As they find domains that don't have protection, then they'll start studying those domains to see what possible attacks they could do, what kind of requests. These guys are smart. They have all the time in the world, and they don't have to be successful every time. If they're getting a 10 or 15% success rate, and they're generating emails that could possibly bring in $100,000 in a given day, 15% is still $15,000 return. That's a pretty good wage for a day. So basically what they're looking for are domains without the DMARC record at all, which is still quite prevalent, or they have their policy set to P equals none. P equals none is kind of a test status. So it basically says, regardless of what the outcome is from the SPF and DKIM check, then you're still going to allow it to pass. And what I've seen a lot is the perpetrators of this domain spoofing activity will actually put an IP address in as the source of their email, which doesn't resolve anywhere. But because they have their stuff set up, or they know they're dealing with an unprotected domain, that they're able to get by with the attack. So these are the 3 DNS records that I talk about. Sender policy framework, which basically tests email server origination address. So basically it's saying, okay, here I am at BlueTeamAssess.com. Can anybody send mail on my behalf? And the answer is no. I explicitly identify anybody who can send mail on my behalf. Domain keys identified mail is a cryptographic signature, which makes sure that the receiving domain can authenticate the email and attest to its integrity through a cryptographic process. And then finally, domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance, such a mouthful, DMARC, directs the email service at the receiving domain what to do when SPF or DKIM fail. So P equals none allows the email to follow the path defined by server and be accepted, regardless of SPF and DKIM. P equals reject is the other extreme that fail either SPF or DKIM, and there's variants that you can do within that stuff. And then the final threat I want to talk about is typo squatting. So basically, and you can pull a typo squat attack on pretty much any domain you want. You can always find a 1-character substitution, which will make that domain name unique. Once you've done that, then just build up a basic environment that has a mail server, a workstation, and a web server all tied to that domain name, and then find the key staff in Microsoft and begin sending email to them at Microsoft.com, as well as sending email to Microsoft customers that is coming not from Microsoft.com, but MICR0S0FT.com, with the idea that the receiver is not going to be privy to that. And the only thing that's going to trip this up is if Microsoft has their email authentication record set up correctly. And the bottom line is, since the target email server is not rejecting the emails with a P equals none or no DMARC issue, there's a chance that the target user may be convinced to click on a malicious URL or open the email only to be infected. So any questions so far?
I don't see anything yet in the chat, but again, a reminder, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box.
So, summary. So we talked briefly about why cybersecurity for small businesses. We talked about the threat of business identity theft and how it compares to consumer identity theft. We talked about some specific threats to business and ways to remediate those threats. And of course, we only have a very small time to have this discussion. So obviously, if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me, just Google my business and it will show up somewhere. But these are the things that, we kind of went over. And again, welcome again to National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And remember this as a takeaway. Tune your business to earn the trust of your customers and business partners. Yes, there's an ulterior motive to this, is tune your business so that it is behaving as well as it can behave in terms of your communication with others. And the better you do it, better job you do of that, the better job you're going to have of surviving against the bad guys. And with that, that concludes the remarks. Hopefully everybody's found this interesting. If we were in a not doing social distancing, I probably would have looked around and seen how many people had fallen asleep and throw rubber balls at them, or maybe use my Nerf gun.
Oh man, thank you so much, Mike, for all this information. Just a quick reminder to everyone listening in that if you want to go back and listen to this again or to check out part 1, visit our YouTube page, Better Business Bureau of Eastern North Carolina. And thank you all for joining us. A special thanks to you, Mike, for sharing your professional insight with us today. And again, check out the other videos on our YouTube page. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Catherine. I want to thank the Better Business Bureau for providing this opportunity, because it is so important that our businesses understand their options and what they need to do to protect their business. It's been bad enough with COVID putting a cramp in our style, let alone to have the bad guys being able to leverage COVID to cause even worse and longer lasting damage.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So thank you for sharing. And for those listening live or listening to the recording, definitely reach out to Mike if you have any other questions about making sure that you personally or your business is cyber secure. Thank you all again and have a great day.